The Call from the Morgue.
On Tuesday, October 14th, 2014, the rain in Baltimore came down in hard sheets that turned the street into a shallow, moving mirror. Red and blue light kept sliding across my living room walls like restless hands. I stood barefoot on the cold floor, staring through the front window at two patrol cars angled wrong at the curb, as if they'd stopped in a hurry. My daughter, my only child, was supposed to be inside the house behind me, asleep in her room, a soft rise and fall I could usually hear if I listened for it. A knock hit the door, firm and measured, not angry, not friendly, the kind of knock that assumes you'll open because you don't have a choice. When I pulled the door open, the younger officer's eyes went past me, scanning the hallway like he was counting exits. The older one stayed on my face. "Mr. Harlan?" he asked. I nodded, already feeling my stomach pool tight. "We need you to come with us," he said. "It's about your daughter." The word daughter landed heavy. My mouth went dry. I tried to speak, and nothing came out at first, just a breath that felt too small. "Is she hurt?" I finally managed. The older officer didn't answer directly. He shifted his weight just enough to show me he'd done this before. He held a folded paper close to his chest, like it could cut him. "We need you to identify her," he said, "at the city morgue." For a second, my mind refused it. It reached for the safest explanation, a mix-up, wrong address, some other Harlan, some other girl. I wanted to tell them they had the wrong house, that my kid was right there, that she had school tomorrow, that I'd yelled at her about dirty dishes 2 hours earlier and she'd rolled her eyes in that way that used to make my wife laugh before everything in our life cracked. I turned my head and called her name down the hallway. No answer. I walked past the officers without inviting them in. My feet slapped the wood floor. Her bedroom door was half open. The lamp was off. Her bed was made, too neat, like it hadn't been touched. My pulse started to climb in a way that made my hands tingle. On her desk sat her backpack. Her coat was still on the chair. The window was shut, locked. Nothing looked torn up. Nothing screamed runaway. The officers stayed behind me, silent, letting the room tell its own story. I heard myself say, low and dumb, "That's not possible." The older officer's voice came quietly, almost careful. "Sir, the woman we have matches your daughter's name and date of birth." I stared at the made bed until my eyes burned, because I only had one child. And if my daughter was lying on a steel table downtown,
The daughter who wasn't supposed to
had
exist.
been living in my house.
The morgue smelled like disinfectant and old air, the kind that never quite moves no matter how strong the vents hum. I remember the clock on the wall, 11:42 p.m., because my brain clung to numbers that night, like they could anchor me to something solid. They led me down a narrow hallway, pale tiles, scuffed baseboards, a door with a small window clouded from years of fingerprints. The attendant didn't ask if I was ready. He just nodded once and pulled the sheet back. The face looking up at me was familiar in a way that punched the breath out of my chest. Same dark hair, same chin that had come from my side of the family. Same faint scar above the left eyebrow, the one my daughter got falling off her bike when she was 6. But something was wrong. It wasn't her. The nose was slightly different. The mouth rested at a sharper angle. And when I looked closer, past the swelling and the stillness, I realized the scar sat a fraction higher than it should. I shook my head before anyone asked. "That's not my daughter," I said. My voice sounded steady, which surprised me. "She looks like her, but that's not her." The attendant froze. The officers exchanged a look that carried more weight than words. "She was found with your daughter's ID," the older officer said. "Same name, same birthday." "That doesn't make her my kid," I said. They let the sheet fall back into place. The sound of it sliding over skin made my stomach twist. I walked out of the room feeling hollow, like someone had scooped something essential out of my chest and forgotten to put anything back. Outside, the rain had slowed, but the pavement still shined under the streetlights. In the car, the younger officer finally spoke. "There's something else," he said. "The medical examiner believes this wasn't a suicide." I turned toward him slowly. "She was found hanging," he continued, "but the bruising doesn't match. Defensive marks, signs of restraint. Murder." The word didn't hit all at once. It seeped in, cold and heavy. "So someone killed her, a woman who looks like my daughter, who carried her name." "Yes." I stared out the window as the city slid past. Row houses, closed corner stores, a bus stop with no one waiting. "Then my daughter is alive," I said. It wasn't hope, it was logic, the only thing keeping me upright. Back home, I checked every room again. Her bed was still untouched, her phone was gone. So was the small lockbox from the closet where I kept old paperwork, birth certificates, hospital records, things I hadn't looked at in years. That was when a memory surfaced, not loud, not clear, just a faint thing, buried. A hospital hallway, a doctor who wouldn't meet my eyes, and my brother standing a little too close, a little too calm, saying, "You don't need to worry about the details, we'll handle it." I sat down hard on the edge of the bed, because suddenly the question wasn't who that woman was, it was who decided she wasn't supposed to exist at all.
Twins separated by a lie. I didn't sleep that night. I sat at the kitchen table with the lights off, watching dawn creep in through the blinds like it was sneaking up on me. Around 5, I pulled the lockbox replacement key from my junk drawer and opened what little paperwork I had left. That's when the gaps started to show. The birth certificate copy I'd kept for years looked normal at first glance. My daughter's name, my name, her mother's, but the hospital stamp was faint, almost smeared like it had been pressed twice, and the attending physician's signature didn't match the one I found online from the same year. That alone wouldn't have meant much, except I remembered that hallway. The day my wife gave birth had been long and loud and confusing. Complications, rushed voices, a nurse who kept saying everything was fine while not answering questions, and then hours later, a single baby placed in my arms. One baby. But now I couldn't stop replaying the moments after. The delay, the paperwork that arrived late, my brother, Cal, handling things I hadn't asked him to handle. Cal had always been like that, older, confident, tight with the town's money and the people who controlled it. When my wife died 2 years later, he'd stepped in again, helped with arrangements, helped with legal forms, helped me simplify my life while I was drowning. I trusted him because it was easier than thinking straight. By mid-morning, the medical examiner called. They'd found something else on the woman who died. A small spiral notebook, she said, hidden behind a vent cover in the apartment where she was found. The apartment wasn't mine. It was a studio across town, paid in cash, leased under a fake name. Inside the notebook were dates, addresses, short observations written in careful block letters, and one sentence underlined twice. "If anything happens to me, look up Jane Merrick." Jane. The name pulled at something old. By afternoon, I remembered where I'd heard it. Jane Merrick had been my wife's closest friend in college. She'd been there the day the twins were born. Twins. The words settled into place with a sick kind of certainty. I drove to Jane's last known address, a narrow townhouse just outside the city. The windows were dark, the mailbox overflowed. A neighbor told me Jane had moved years ago, right after some trouble involving a local developer. That developer's name matched one I knew well. The town boss Cal had always defended, the man who'd backed his business deals, the man who'd made problems disappear. That night, I went back home and opened my daughter's room again. I wasn't looking for comfort anymore. I was looking for proof. Behind the vent near the floor, the screws were loose, and tucked inside was a second notebook, smaller, newer. Same handwriting, same careful block letters, same truth finally clawing its way into the light.
Signs of murder, not suicide. The notebook was thin, the cover bent like it had been opened and closed too many times in a hurry. I sat on the floor with my back against the bed and read it straight through, once without stopping, then again slower, letting the weight of it settle. She knew. The woman who'd been killed, the one who shared my daughter's face, had known the truth for years. She wrote about growing up in foster homes, about a forged adoption, about being told her mother had died in childbirth and her father had never asked for her. That last part hollowed me out. She wrote about finding records that didn't line up, about a hospital clerk who'd been paid to look the other way, about a lawyer who specialized in quiet family corrections. And then, toward the end, the tone changed. She wrote about being followed, about a man who waited across the street too often, about phone calls that went silent when she answered, about a meeting she didn't want to attend but felt forced into, a chance to be compensated, they'd told her, if she agreed to disappear for good. The final entry was dated 3 days before she died. They think I'm the loose end, but I'm not the one they're afraid of. I closed the notebook and sat there until my legs went numb. By then, I understood something that chilled me more than the murder itself. She hadn't been the intended victim. The death scene started to make sense once I stopped looking at it as a suicide gone wrong. The medical examiner walked me through it later, rope fibers inconsistent with the apartment fixtures, bruising on the wrists, blunt force trauma masked as a fall. Someone had staged it quickly, sloppily, like they'd been interrupted. That same night, my phone buzzed, a number I didn't recognize. I let it go to voicemail. When I listened back, my brother's voice filled the room. "Listen," Cal said, calm as ever. "I heard you've been asking questions. That's not smart. Let this go, for your daughter's sake." My daughter, the one asleep somewhere I couldn't see, the one who wasn't supposed to exist twice. I didn't call him back. I didn't confront him. I did something safer. I disappeared. Within 48 hours, I pulled cash from 3 different banks. I canceled my phone. I left town before anyone noticed the house was empty. I didn't take pictures. I didn't tell friends. I left my car parked where it would gather tickets and look forgotten. And I watched from a distance as news spread that I'd gone into shock, that I couldn't cope, that grief had finally broken me. They believed it because they needed to. From the shadows, I followed the trail the dead woman had left behind. Jane, the payments, the shell companies, the quiet fixer who'd arranged the solution. And I waited. Because truth doesn't need speed. It needs time.
The Gala Trap. I stayed gone for 8 months. Long enough for the house to be sold through a quiet court motion my brother filed on my behalf. Long enough for Cal to tell people I'd lost my grip. Long enough for the town boss, Elliot Crane, to stop worrying. I rebuilt myself the way men do when they don't want to be found. New name, cash work, cheap rooms. I read everything the dead woman had touched. Her notebook led me to Jane, and Jane led me to bank transfers hidden behind non-profit fronts and redevelopment funds. Crane didn't just bury problems, he bought silence in advance. Jane was living 2 states away under her maiden name, older, sharper, waiting. She didn't cry when I told her what had happened. She just closed her eyes and said, "They finally killed the wrong girl." Jane confirmed what the journals hinted at. Twins, pressure at the hospital, a payoff framed as a liability reduction. My wife had been sedated longer than necessary. Paperwork altered before she ever woke up. Cal had signed as witness. The plan was simple and brutal. 1 child to raise quietly, 1 to erase cleanly. Jane had tried to warn the dead twin years ago. Too late. Then she'd tried to warn me. That was why the trap had been set. The gala invitation arrived 3 weeks later. Charity redevelopment dinner, black tie, city museum. Crane's favorite stage. Public, photographed, untouchable. I returned under a legal claim no one expected. A trust amendment triggered by a beneficiary death and dormant for decades. My wife's handwriting, Jane's foresight. The document forced disclosure of every shell account tied to the payoff at the hospital. Crane didn't recognize me when I walked into the hall. Cal did. His face drained of color so fast it was almost a mercy. There was no gun, no shouting, no dramatic collapse. Just evidence projected on a screen while donors sipped wine. Just a recorded conversation Crane had assumed would never surface. Just Jane, standing up and naming dates, numbers, and names that had fed on silence for 30 years. My daughter was escorted out safely before the arrests began. Cal tried to speak. The room turned its back on him. At trial, there was testimony. There were documents. There was sentencing. Crane will die in prison. Cal will live with what he chose. I live with what remains. The truth didn't bring my family back whole, but it stopped the lie from claiming another life. And sometimes, that's the only kind of justice left worth fighting for.
Grief, justice, and what remains. Final. The house I live in now is smaller, quieter. It creaks when the temperature changes. I chose it on purpose. Nothing fancy, nothing tied to memory. From the front porch I can see the road clearly. That matters to me more than it used to. My daughter lives nearby, not with me, but close enough that I can drive over without calling first. We don't talk about everything. We don't need to. Some truths don't require daily discussion to stay real. She knows she had a sister. She knows her name. She knows she was loved, even if that love arrived too late to save her. The trial ended the way trials usually do, not with relief, but with exhaustion. Words read into the record, years assigned to men who believed money could outlive consequence. When the judge finished, there was no moment of triumph, just a quiet understanding that nothing else could be done. My brother hasn't spoken to me since sentencing. That silence is its own sentence. I've thought a lot about disappearance, how easy it is to erase someone if enough people agree not to look, how systems meant to protect can be bent gently, legally, until they break the wrong way. How lies don't survive because they're strong, but because they're convenient. The dead twin understood that. She documented everything because she knew truth needs witnesses, even when the witness is gone. Sometimes I take out her notebook, not to read it all again, just to feel the weight of it in my hands. Proof that she was here. Proof that she fought back the only way she could. I didn't win a revenge story. I didn't get satisfaction wrapped in closure. What I got was clarity. The lie that shaped my life died in public. The people who fed on it lost the shelter of silence, and my daughter, the one who lived, got to grow up without being hunted for a truth she never chose. If there's a lesson in all this, it isn't about vengeance, it's about attention. Because evil doesn't always come with violence. Sometimes it arrives with paperwork, calm voices, and family members who tell you not to ask questions. And the cost of believing them is almost always paid by someone who never had a choice. If this story made you think about your family, your past, or the things that never quite added up, don't ignore that feeling. Truth doesn't fade with time. It just waits for someone brave enough to say it out loud.